Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to address this distinguished committee, and I'm going to say it's amazing how we have somewhat all focused on the same points. I was asked to talk about the administration's new proposal and specifically a few items: the proposal to cancel the Constellation program, the reliance on commercial spacecraft for low Earth orbit, testing of Rocket X in support of a heavy lift vehicle, and astronaut safety issues. And I'm going to speak from the perspective of a longtime member of that NASA family, and indeed I feel somewhat that I still am, somewhat like a Marine, always a Marine. And notwithstanding the comments that we heard today, the administration's proposal opens more questions than it answers. What is the vision? Where are we going? And this abrupt change in NASA's exploration approach has no clear path, no destination, no milestones, no program focus, hence none of the technology pull that is so important to real innovation. With no specific program, it becomes too easy in the future to cancel something called technology development as simply unfocused and unaffordable. And this could take NASA down a path that would completely end its human spaceflight endeavor. NASA must maintain global leadership in human spaceflight. With the International Space Station in low Earth orbit now, NASA has established a frontier in space. To maintain the global leadership and core competencies in human spaceflight, NASA must now focus on establishing the new frontier beyond low Earth orbit. The Augustine panel had several things to say about that. This is a quote: "There is now a strong consensus in the United States that the next step in human spaceflight is to travel beyond low Earth orbit." Another quote: "The committee concluded that the ultimate goal of human exploration is to chart a path for human expansion into the solar system. Establishing this new frontier is inherently governmental due to the risks that must be accepted by our professional astronauts and the huge investments required. This means, in spite of the words that we've heard today, NASA needs a destination, a goal, whether it is Mars, Lagrange points, near-Earth asteroids, or whatever. NASA must define the roadmap and the technological achievements required to achieve this goal. This becomes the flexible path, gives us the technology pull, and focuses our investment. NASA needs a heavy lift vehicle to accomplish these goals. The specific questions, I want to start with astronaut safety. That was always a subject very dear to my heart, not just as an astronaut, but as a former member of the NASA family and a former chief astronaut. And of course, Senator Mikulski, as we know, has some very specific feelings in that area too. She said, "Astronaut safety, the safety of our astronauts is my #1 priority. This means whatever transportation system is chosen, it must protect our astronauts during launch, mission execution, re-entry, including long-duration spaceflight." As to the space shuttle part of this question, the Augustine Commission had several things to say there too. Space operations are among the most complex and unforgiving pursuits ever undertaken by humans. It really is rocket science. And new human-rated launch vehicles will likely be more reliable once they reach maturity, but in the meantime, the shuttle is in the enviable position of being through its infant mortality phase. Its flight experience and demonstrated reliability should not be discounted. And I think it's important to consider just briefly how successful we have been. And I want to say no one feels the loss of the Challenger and the Columbia more than I do, because I knew both of those crews. But it's significant to note that we have flown 130 missions now. We just completed the 130th mission of the space shuttle. And compare that to our previous entire space program, which was 31 total launches. All of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo amounted to 31 total launches. So therefore, we have flown more than 4 times as many launches with the shuttle as our entire space program prior to this. So it has been, I think, a great accomplishment. As for the commercial sector, they may very well ultimately achieve the success and the reliability that we demand for human endeavors, but to me it makes no sense to turn everything over at this time to an unproven vehicle. We need to allow them to establish a track record flying cargo, that will allow us to evolve into human carriage with those types of vehicles. Now, at the same time, NASA needs to help the commercial service providers to be successful. And for that to happen, we need to leverage the core talents and the abilities, the operations, the safety of our NASA human spaceflight centers. And let's not lose the lessons that we've learned over 50 years of human spaceflight, some of them at fairly high cost. We must also maintain the core expertise in the people that we have at NASA that is so necessary to keep up any human spaceflight endeavor. With the ending of the Space Shuttle program and the proposed cancellation of the Constellation program, and with no specific program to replace them, more than a third of NASA's workforce of experienced space professionals is at risk of being lost. This would represent a major disruption in our human spaceflight program, as well as our economic and industrial base. We must make sure that we maintain that. And Senator Mikulski also touched on that when she said workforce transition, the retirement of the Space Shuttle should proceed as planned in 2011 after ISS assembly is complete, and any future direction must include a plan to maintain critical skills and incorporate lessons learned from our previous efforts to replace the shuttle and to soften any job dislocation impacts. And that was her quote. Commercial spacecraft, as I've already touched on, may eventually be reliable enough to give us the capability that we need, but there's still a large learning curve that's ahead of them. And for them to succeed in space is going to take a lot of involvement with the NASA centers of expertise. There is a quote that the Augustine Committee had to say as well about that, and it is, if we craft the space architecture to provide opportunities to this industry, there is the potential, not without risk, that the cost to the government would be reduced. And it's this very risk inherent in this approach that demands that NASA remain vitally involved. We also need a backup to the Russian Soyuz for transporting our astronauts to the ISS. The present cost of $51 million per crew member will change when we no longer have our own access to space. The head of the Russian Space Agency, Anatoly Permanov, has already stated, and this is a quote, "We have an agreement until 2012 that Russia will be responsible for this," and this is referring to transporting astronauts of other nations to the International Space Station. And then he goes on to say, but after that, excuse me, but the prices should be absolutely different then. And his statement, absolutely different then, is somewhat frightening to me. The Russians are new to capitalism, but they know how it works, and when you have a monopoly, you charge monopoly prices. We have an opportunity at this time to leverage a lot of the research and the development and the funding that went into the Constellation program to continue with development of Rocket X, a vehicle that would support heavy lift vehicle, by continuing to develop the 5-segment rocket booster, the J-2 engine, and the Orion spacecraft as the quickest and most inexpensive way to working our way to a heavy lift vehicle. In summary, I want to state that with the retirement of the Space Shuttle later this year, and if the administration's proposal is followed, the United States will no longer be a spacefaring nation. We will have placed the future of our space program in the hands of the Russians and the unproven commercial sector, and with no program on the drawing boards, we will have ceased exploration beyond low Earth orbit and will be many years away from any hope of regaining what we once had. And what we once had was an exciting and vibrant space program that was the envy of the world and literally lit up the eyes of thousands of school children around the world that I've spoken to over the last 30 years. Mr. Chairman, I'm hopeful that you and your colleagues can alter the course that we appear to be on. Thank you for allowing me to testify today.